What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome to another episode of Brett on Fett. On today's episode, we'll take a look at the Dewback and Sandtrooper set from the Legacy Collection, and I'll count down my top 5 most wanted creatures for the Vintage Collection. Plus, I've got some pickups to share, including my second ever Vintage Kenner mint-on carded figure. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 75 of Brett on Fett, and the Vintage Collection has been around since 2010. Now, it did take a large hiatus between about 2013 and 2018, but since that time, Hasbro has only produced one significant creature set for the Vintage Collection. Now, in recent years, they have produced small creatures as bonus pack-ins for figures such as the Mandalorian, and recently a deluxe Tatooine warrior. But as far as products featuring a creature of a significant size that is the main focus of the purchase, Hasbro has only produced one for the Vintage Collection, and that is the Tauntaun from Empire Strikes Back. Now, ironically, I have not been much of a creature collector. I've always focused on action figures and occasionally picking up vehicles, but recently I've become more interested in getting a few creatures. I've always liked the Dewback and Sandtrooper combination, and so I recently picked up a Dewback and Sandtrooper set from the Legacy Collection, and so I want to go over that with you guys, and then I'll talk about my top 5 most wanted creatures for the Vintage Collection. Before we get into that, I do want to just feature a few pickups I recently got, including my second ever Vintage Kenner mint-on carded figure I'm very excited about, so let's take a look. Alright, so if you've been following my channel, you may recall back in May, I picked up my very first Vintage Kenner mint-on card figure, that being the Bossk on a 48 back C. I love this thing. It's currently away at the grader. I can't wait to see what I end up getting because it's a beautiful card back. And I've had loose Kenner figures for years, but have been wanting to get into the mint-on card collecting for Vintage Kenner. But I just want to take my time and be responsible about it because it can get very expensive. And whenever you start collecting something, you always want to start out with a focus so you're not just spending willy-nilly on everything that type of collecting has to offer. And so for me, for Vintage Kenner mint-on card figures, I'm focusing on Empire Strikes Back characters on Empire Strikes Back card backs with a main goal of getting all of the bounty hunters on a 48C back, just like this Bossk here, minus the Boba Fett. That's gonna have to come much later, or maybe on a separate loose figure combined with a separate card back combo, something like that, because I just cannot afford an actual Boba Fett on a 48C card back. And another main goal of mine is to pick up a high quality 21B mint-on card. Aside from Boba Fett, 21B was one of my favorite figures as a kid, and I just carried that love all the way out through adulthood. So I will be on the lookout for a 21B. But the other day, an opportunity came about to pick up a great deal on another Empire Strikes Back character, and that was Yoda. And this was on a 32 back B card back. This is the debut card for Yoda. And my friend John, Action Figure Grader on YouTube, he does an awesome thing for Patreon supporters. If he comes across what he thinks is a good deal, he'll email it out to all his Patreon supporters, and he sent this out, and man, I jumped on it. The seller's initial buy it now price was already a pretty good deal, but he had to make an offer option, so I went ahead and made him an offer, threw out a number. I didn't think he would accept, but he did accept it immediately. And so I could not be happier with the deal. Thanks again, John, Action Figure Grader. If you are not a subscriber, I highly recommend subscribing to his channel, and I recommend becoming a Patreon member because of those perks of getting notified on those deals ahead of time. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at this figure. Now, this is by no means a perfect example. There are a few issues I will show you. Of course, it is a punched card back, but in the top left corner, you do have a ding there with some creasing. And then on the left edge, you've got some edge wear. And then kind of in the middle of the card back, you do have some white like litho spots where maybe there was a sticker a long time ago, but it's really faint. And overall, it's just a beautiful example. The back is basically flawless minus that same corner ding. And other than that, yeah, it just looks great. And so with consideration of the deal I got on this figure, I think those issues are very minor. And this figure should easily grade a 75, possibly as high as an 80. And I will send it to the grader eventually, but for now, I'm going to hang on to it and enjoy it in my room. Perhaps I'll wait until my boss gets back from the grader before I send this bad boy out. But thanks again, John, for helping me find this deal. This is an awesome second Kenner MOC to add to my collection. All right, so let's take a look at this Dewback set I got. This is from the Legacy Collection. It was a Walmart exclusive. It says Dewback with Imperial Sandtrooper. The packaging is very nice. I really like this artwork on the side there of the Dewback. That looks really cool. And there's images of what's included, and it says Sandtrooper really rides Dewback. Well, we'll see about that. And this box is in pretty good condition, so the inbox collector in me hurts a little bit to open this thing. But I didn't buy this to keep it in the box, so let's get it open. Just wanted to show the backdrop insert that was included in the packaging. That's always a nice touch. I like when Hasbro does this sort of thing, kind of set the scene. Now let's start out by taking a look at the Imperial Sandtrooper itself, and it is a pretty good mold. You know, Legacy Collection did have some pretty good looking molds. I'm pretty sure this thing was carried forward to the initial Vintage Collection release. It's got that pauldron there. It's a very hard plastic, actually, not very flexible. I really like the backpack, and it just snaps off with that plug there, so that works nicely, and it seems pretty firm. Articulation, a little bit tight on the head, but plenty of articulation at the shoulder and elbows. The wrists are just swivel, no hinges. And let's see, you've got a crunch there, pretty standard, not a lot of flexibility back and forward. It's got a standard ball hinge at the hip, ball hinge at the knee with 90 degrees, and a standard hinge at the ankle, but no rocker ankles. So let's take a look at his accessories. He comes with this blaster rifle. Mine was a bit bent. The barrel of this thing is extremely gummy, similar to some of the recent stuff we've gotten for like the clone troopers. And then he comes with this baton rod thing he uses to direct the Dewback, and this one's pretty good. It's not too gummy or anything. Now let's take a look at how we get this in his hands, and I really don't like the right hand. I cannot fit the rifle grip in there, so I had to put it on his left hand, and that does have a trigger finger, so it's almost like they intended you to put the rifle in his left hand, which is a bit odd to me. So that was a little bit annoying. But the baton staff thing does fit just fine in either hand, so no problem there. Now I just want to bring in the TVC versions of the Sandtroopers to compare. Now this is the initial Sandtrooper release for TVC, and I'm almost positive this is the exact same mold, exact same figure. It's even got that same blaster rifle on the back. Just comes with an additional weapon as well. And this was the second TVC release of a Sandtrooper, and this is a much better version. Not only is it a slightly better mold, but I just really like the sand dirt all over that figure. It's a Sandtrooper, so I like my Sandtroopers to be dirty with sand, and so I really wish the Dewback came with a version more like that. And here is the Dewback himself. He looks great, but right off the bat, one thing I knew about before I even bought this was I think the mold is too skinny. This is a lean Dewback. Dewbacks are very stocky, and I think they just made him too lean. But the details of the mold are great. Everything looks really good here. And I think maybe my favorite part is the saddle. Take a look at the detailing on the saddle. This is excellent. Really good molding by Hasbro in this case. Great paint applications. And the whole saddle piece is separate from the Dewback's body. That would have been really bad if it was just part of the mold for the figure itself, but it is separate, which is great. The harness is on a little swivel piece there at the mouth, which is also very good that you have that flexibility. Now, unfortunately, his mouth does not articulate, and that's pretty sad considering my Lego Dewback has an articulated mouth. If they could do it with Lego, surely they could do it with an action figure toy, so that's a bit disappointing. But his head is articulated at the neck. You can swivel it side to side and twist it all the way around. The legs have a swivel connection there at the body, and then at the ankles you have like ball hinge joints, so you can swivel it side to side and go up and down there with the hinges. So that's good. I like that. Unfortunately, the tail has zero articulation, so that's a little bit disappointing as well. But for me personally, I don't like too many points of articulation on a creature like this, because if you have too many joints, it starts to look a bit unrealistic. For example, I like that they didn't put joints at the knees because I didn't think it was really necessary. For example, the Black Series version of the Dewback, it's a pretty good looking mold, but see the hinge joints at the knees, I just think it was one too many joints and just starts to look unrealistic. But maybe that's just me, and maybe most of you would prefer the additional articulation. And one last thing about the Dewback I want to add as far as his appearance goes is the color they chose, I think, is too light of a green. I think the Black Series version did a much better job of matching the source material as far as the skin color for these things. Alright, so next let's try to get the Sandtrooper on the Dewback and see how well he actually rides it. Alright, so after fidgeting with him for several minutes, I was able to get him on there okay. He does sit on the saddle, but it's very awkward. You have to spread his legs in a really awkward position, but he does get on there. So, you know, mission accomplished, I guess, but it's still very awkward, especially from certain angles. I did the best I could. Another thing that was kind of difficult is getting the harness in his hand. It's just a little bit tricky. But, you know, I'm looking at the box and, you know, they obviously used some photo trickery because it looks really good there in that image, the way they have him settled. And I just found it really hard to get it in that exact position that they show on the box. Now, the only thing I think they could have done is somehow re-sculpted the saddle so that the figure completely fits on the saddle itself, with some sort of channelized indentions for his legs to go so that he's just fitting on the saddle and not having to straddle the actual creature itself. And I was complaining earlier about the Dewback being too skinny and not stocky enough, so that would make it even more challenging. So I realized that. So this is all easier said than done. But I think with a little bit of creativity, you can position him at least from one angle where it doesn't look too bad at all. And possibly with a newer figure that utilizes the barbell style hips, you may be able to position them even better. Alright, so with that, I want to talk about creatures for the Vintage Collection. I mentioned earlier, the Vintage Collection has only produced one creature set, that being the Tauntaun. And so I want to give you guys my top 5 most wanted creatures for the Vintage Collection. Now, this is just purely based on my opinion and what I'd like to see. So I would like to hear from you guys on what creatures you'd like to see for TVC. So with that said, let's look at my top 5. Now, I could not help myself. I always have to throw in an honorable mention, and for that, I chose the Sarlacc. This, of course, is that creature from the Pit of Carcoon scene with Jabba's sail barge. I just think it would be awesome to have a set for those of you that have the sail barge, or at least the skiff, to set it up some dioramas. Now, we've had a Sarlacc set before from the Legacy Collection, but with like most things, I think Hasbro can always do better, and so I'd like to see a better version of this set made available to newer collectors and those collectors who have the Jabba sail barge or the skiffs. Alright, coming in at number 5, I chose the Mudhorn from The Mandalorian. This was an iconic scene where Mando fights this beast to get the egg for the Jawas. It's also the first time we see Grogu using the Force, and he's just a really cool looking beast. Now, of course, if Hasbro was to make this creature, they would have to give TVC collectors the muddy version of Mando that they made for the Black Series, and they could pack them all in together as one playset. At number 4, I have the Wampa from Empire Strikes Back. Anything from Empire Strikes Back is iconic to me, and so this was just a very memorable scene with the Wampa beast and Luke Skywalker. And so I just love to see a new version of this. Now, we've had a pretty decent version for the Black Series, back in the day. That was like a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive. But for 3 3/4, the best version we've probably had was from this Force Link 2.0 Last Jedi series, and it still leaves something to be desired. It's not horrible, but I would just love to see an updated version that we could have interacting with that TVC Hoth Luke Skywalker. Next at number 3, I have the Rancor from Return of the Jedi, but this could also be marketed for Book of Boba Fett since the Rancor did make an appearance in that show as well. And I just think this is an iconic creature, and so it's always good to get an update for him. Now, we've had some pretty good versions of the Rancor. The Power of the Force 2 version was actually pretty good looking, and then they had this awesome Force Awakens version from the 30th anniversary, and a very good Black Series 3.75 Rancor as well. But again, it's always good to get updates for iconic characters and even creatures, if anything, to give newer collectors a chance to get their hands on those. But I'm sure it could also be an opportunity for Hasbro to improve upon the 3.75 Rancor. I don't have this Black Series Rancor, but there's always room for improvement. And it would also be a good opportunity for Hasbro to finally give us a Rancor Keeper, aka Malakili, for the Vintage Collection. We desperately need him to help complete the 96. And if I'm being honest, if they wanted to market this thing as Book of Boba Fett, I wouldn't hate the idea of them giving us a Danny Trejo Rancor Keeper action figure for TVC. I mean, who wouldn't want a Danny Trejo action figure? I just think that would be so cool. Of course, they would have to eventually give us the traditional Malakili Rancor Keeper to complete the 96 sometime later. But come on, a Machete action figure for Star Wars?
Yes, please.
My number 2 is the Bantha from A New Hope, but again, this could also be from Book of Boba Fett. What an iconic creature, and we've just got so many Tuskens now, so many good Tuskens. We need a Bantha for them to ride. We've also, of course, got the Tusken Boba Fett. We've got Fennec Shand. All of these characters interacted with the Bantha, so I think it is time for Hasbro to give us a new version. Now, of course, we've had several Banthas in the past. I do like this version they put out under Power of the Force 2 with the hair, but I just think they overdid it a little bit with the hair. They need to dial it back some and have a combination of soft plastic and hair to make this thing really look good, so it doesn't just come off as a giant fur ball. There was also this 30th anniversary version of the Bantha, but this one just looked weird to me. There's something off about it with its face and everything. So I just think Hasbro could do better, so I think it's time for a definitive version of the Bantha for the Vintage Collection. And my number 1 creature choice is the Blurg from The Mandalorian. Of course, these are also featured in those really bad Ewok made-for-television movies. But these bipedaling beasts have become iconic. They have become fan favorites in recent years. They're a part of some important scenes from the show, and we've got figures for these characters that interact with the Blurgs. And so give us the Blurg so we can have him ride it. It just seems like something they could easily do. It's a small creature. The mold is not too complicated. They've already done it for the Mission Fleet Kids line. So just go ahead and give us a 3.75 detailed version for the Vintage Collection. Alright, so that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. Let me know in the comments which creature you would most like to see for the Vintage Collection. Thanks for checking out this video. Thank you to my subscribers. Don't forget you can also follow me on Instagram and on Twitter/X. Take care, and we'll see you next time.